Ambassador was drinking her morning tea when the emergency signal screamed through the Sol embassy. She dropped her cup and ran to the communication room. The holographic display showed a face she had never expected to see directly, High of the Oriat Collective, a being so old that he had watched stars die. Ambassador, the ancient alien said, his voice was shaking, had studied his species for 20 years, they never shook. The accord requires humanity's presence, immediately. 3 hours later, shuttle docked at Nexus Prime, the great station at the center of the Galactic Accord. She had been here many times before, always as a junior partner, always treated with polite smiles and gentle words that meant nothing. Humanity had joined the Accord 300 years ago, and in all that time, they had been patted on the head like children. Today was different. Today, the ancient beings who ruled 1,000 star systems looked at her with something new in their eyes. It took her a moment to recognize it: fear. The council chamber was the largest room had ever seen. 12 species sat in a circle, each one older than human civilization. The youngest of them, had been traveling between stars when humans were still living in caves. The oldest, the Oriat Collective, claimed to remember a time before the galaxy had finished forming. Ambassador, High said, "Thank you for coming so quickly." "What has happened?" asked. The holographic display in the center of the room changed. It showed a star map, with dozens of systems marked in red. "The Dominion," another said. His name was Hose, and he was 9,000 years old. "They came from beyond the mapped regions. They have been conquering our worlds for 6 months." Studied the map. The red marks were spreading like a disease. "How many worlds?" 47 said. "3 of our member species have fallen completely. The singing ones, the children of the Amber Star, gone, all gone." Felt cold. She had met ambassadors from those species. They had been kind to her in their distant way. "What are you doing to stop them?" Silence. The ancient beings looked at each other and saw something she had never expected to see: shame. "We have tried," Hose said slowly. "We sent our defensive fleets, our automated systems, our elder volunteers." He paused. "They were destroyed, all of them." "Your military." "We have not had a true military in 60,000 years," said. "We have peacekeepers, ceremonial guards, defensive stations that have never fired a shot in anger." He looked down at his ancient hands. "We forgot how to fight, Ambassador. We evolved past violence. We thought we had no need for it anymore." Understood now. She understood why they had called her, and the realization made her heart beat faster. "You want our help," she said. "We want your advice," Hose said carefully. "We have heard stories about your species, old stories. We dismissed them as exaggeration, the tales of a young and primitive people. But now—" He stopped. "What stories?" asked. Leaned forward. "Stories about your wars, your endless wars. We have read your histories, Ambassador. Your species has been killing each other since before you learned to write. You built weapons that could destroy your own planet. You sent millions of your own people to die in trenches and deserts and frozen wastelands." His voice was not angry. It was confused. "How? Why? We do not understand. Our species stopped killing each other 100,000 years before we reached the stars." "Yours never stopped at all." Was quiet for a long moment. She thought about her grandfather who had fought in the Mars uprising. She thought about history classes that were filled with blood and fire and sacrifice. "What exactly do you want from us?" she asked. "We want to know if the stories are true," said. "We want to know if your species really has soldiers." The word hung in the air. Noticed that several of them flinched when he said it. "Soldiers," she repeated. "Beings trained specifically for violence, for killing. We read that you have academies where you teach your young to fight, where you take children and turn them into weapons." His voice was very quiet. "We thought it was myth. We thought no civilized species would do such a thing." Stood up. "It is not myth. We have soldiers, millions of them." The council chamber went silent. Some of the ancient beings looked horrified. Others looked hopeful. All of them looked afraid. "Would you send them?" Hose asked. "Would you send your soldiers to fight the—" "I need to contact Earth," said. "I need to speak with our military command. But yes, I believe we would. We have been part of this accord for 300 years. We protect our own." She left the chamber and walked to the communication room. Her hands were shaking as she established a secure connection to Earth. The face that appeared on the screen was weathered, and Admiral Cole, commander of Earth's combined defense forces. "Ambassador," he said, "I received the priority alert. What is happening?" Told him everything. The conquered worlds, the Accord's complete inability to defend itself. When she finished, Admiral Cole was silent for a long time. "They want soldiers," he finally said. "They want us to save them," said. "They have forgotten how to save themselves." Admiral Cole nodded slowly. He was 67 years old, and his body carried the marks of 3 wars. He had hoped that his children would never have to fight like he did. He had hoped that humanity had finally found peace among the stars. He should have known better. Peace never lasted. Someone always came along who wanted to take what others had built. "Tell the council that help is coming," he said. "Tell them to hold on." He ended the transmission and turned to his general staff. They were already waiting, already watching. They had heard everything. "Wake up the academies," Admiral Cole said. "All of them, we're going to war." The generals moved quickly. Messages went out to every military base on Earth, on Mars, on the moons of Jupiter. Training camps that had been half empty began to fill. Factories that had been making civilian goods switched to weapons production. Ships that had been sitting in orbit for decades began their startup sequences. Humanity had joined the Galactic Accord, hopping for peace. They had found it for 300 years, but deep down in their bones and blood and memory, they had never forgotten how to fight. And now the galaxy needed them to remember. Oz had lived for 12,000 years. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched stars explode and new worlds form from the dust. He thought he had seen everything the universe could offer. He was wrong. The staging world of was a peaceful place, covered in purple grass and gentle hills. The Accord had chosen it as the gathering point for their response to the invasion. Diplomats from a dozen elder species had come to watch humanity's contribution arrive. They expected very little. Humans were the youngest species in the Accord, barely 3 centuries old as a spacefaring civilization. What could they possibly offer? A few thousand advisors, perhaps, some automated defense systems, maybe a handful of small ships. The first human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at exactly noon local time. Oz felt his heart stop. There were hundreds of ships, massive warships covered in weapons that the Accord had never seen, carrier vessels the size of small moons, destroyers and cruisers and frigates, all moving in perfect formation, all painted in dark colors that seemed to drink the light. 200 warships, the Orient Observer whispered. "They have sent 200 warships." But that was not what made Oz afraid. Ships were just metal and fire. What came next was something far more terrifying. The troop carriers opened their doors, and the humans came out. 50 million of them. Oz watched them pour onto the purple grass of like a flood. They set up camps with frightening speed. They unloaded weapons and vehicles and supplies. They shouted to each other and laughed and sang songs that Oz did not understand. And they were so young. Oz had studied human biology. He knew their development cycle, their aging process. The beings walking off those ships were barely adults by human standards. Most of them were in their early 20s. Some looked even younger. "Children," the ambassador said. Her voice was filled with horror. "They have sent us children." Oz walked closer to the human camp. He needed to see this for himself. He needed to understand. A group of young humans was setting up a large tent. They were joking with each other, pushing and shoving in a way that looked almost like play fighting. One of them, a female with dark skin and bright eyes, noticed Os watching and waved at him. "Hey there," she called out, "you need something." Os approached slowly. The young human was wearing combat armor and carrying a weapon that looked very dangerous. She smiled at him as if this was completely normal. "How old are you?" Os asked. 22, she said. "Name's Private Tors, Maria Tors. First time off Earth if you can believe it." 22 years old. Os had been 22 once, so long ago that the memory had faded to nothing. At that age, his species kept their young in protected learning centers, surrounded by safety and comfort. The idea of giving a weapon to someone so young was unthinkable. "You are a soldier," Os said. "Yes, sir," Maria said proudly. "3rd Infantry Division, 2nd Battalion. We're the first wave." She looked around at the purple grass and alien sky. "Beautiful planet you got here. Shame we're gonna have to mess it up fighting." "You expect to fight here?" "That's why we came, isn't it?" Maria looked at him with confusion. "They are coming. Someone's gotta stop them." Os did not know what to say. He walked back to the other, his mind spinning with thoughts he could not process. Admiral Cole had set up a command center on a small hill overlooking the camp. Os found him there, studying holographic maps with his officers. The admiral looked up when Os approached. Cole said, "What do you think of our forces?" "I think I do not understand," Os said honestly. "These soldiers of yours, they are young, so very young. In my culture, we would never send beings of that age to danger. We protect our young above all else. If anyone must face death, it is our elders who have already lived full lives." Admiral Cole nodded slowly. "I understand your confusion. Let me ask you something. When your elders go to fight, how do they perform?" Os thought about the reports from the fallen worlds. "They fight carefully. They try to minimize risk. They retreat when danger becomes too great." "Because they have lived long lives," Cole said. "Because they have much to lose. They know what death means. They have seen friends die over thousands of years. They understand deep in their souls that they are mortal." "Yes," Os said. "Is that not wisdom?" Cole pointed at the camp below where young humans were laughing and training and preparing for war. "Those soldiers down there, they don't have that wisdom yet. They're young. They still think they're immortal. They haven't had 10,000 years to grow afraid of death." He smiled, but it was a sad smile. "That's not a weakness. That's their greatest strength." Os watched the young humans. One group was practicing hand-to-hand combat, throwing each other around with what looked like joy. Another group was racing each other across the field, carrying heavy packs on their backs. They were treating war like a game. "They do not fear death," Os said slowly. "They fear failure," Cole said. "They fear letting down their friends. They fear going home in shame. But death," he shook his head. "They're too young to really believe in it, and that makes them the most dangerous force in this galaxy." That night Os could not sleep. He stood on a balcony and watched the human camp below. Fires burned between the tents. He could hear singing, strange human songs about love and home and glory. Occasionally, laughter would rise up into the darkness. They were so alive, these young humans, so full of fire and hope and foolishness. They did not know that tomorrow might bring death, or perhaps they knew and simply did not care. Os had lived for 12,000 years. He had grown wise and careful and afraid. He had learned to protect himself, to avoid risk, to choose survival above all else. These humans had learned something different. They had learned to burn. Far above, hidden in the shadow of a distant moon, a probe watched the human fleet arrive. It recorded everything and sent the data back to Supreme Commander A. She reviewed the images with amusement. Hundreds of ships, yes, but small compared to her armada. Millions of soldiers, yes, but they were children, barely grown, soft and weak and inexperienced. "They send their young to die," she said to her officers. "How pathetic, how desperate the accord must be." She ordered an immediate assault on. The humans would be destroyed quickly, and then the Accord would have no one left to protect them. I was about to learn that she had made a terrible mistake. The came at dawn. Lieutenant was eating breakfast when the alarm started screaming. She dropped her food and grabbed her rifle in one smooth motion. Around her, thousands of other soldiers were doing the same thing. There was no panic. There was no confusion. They had trained for this moment their entire lives. Enemy dropping from orbit. A voice shouted over the communication system. All units to defensive positions. Ran to her assigned sector, her platoon following close behind. They were young, all of them. The oldest was 26. The youngest had just turned 19 3 days ago. They should have been in universities, in offices, in coffee shops back on Earth. Instead, they were about to fight monsters from another galaxy. They landed like falling stars. Their drop pods smashed into the purple grass, and the warriors inside burst out with weapons blazing. Got her first clear look at the enemy and felt her stomach tighten. They were tall, nearly 3 meters high. Their bodies were covered in natural armor that looked like dark stone. Their faces had no expressions that humans could read, just clusters of black eyes and mouths filled with sharp teeth. They moved fast, faster than anything that size should move. And there were so many of them. 80,000 enemy combatants confirmed, the command channel reported. All units engage. Raised her rifle and started shooting. The first hour was chaos. The warriors were veterans of 100 conquests. They had destroyed elder species 10 times older than humanity. They expected the humans to break and run, like every other species they had faced. The humans did not break. Private, 19 years old, held his position even when a warrior cut off his left arm. He kept shooting with his right hand until the medics dragged him away. Sergeant Williams, 24, threw herself on a grenade to save her squad and somehow survived with only burns. Corporal, 22, charged a gun emplacement alone when his squad was pinned down and destroyed it with explosives strapped to his chest. He died smiling. They did not understand. They had fought elder species who retreated when casualties reached 5%, who surrendered when their commanders fell, who valued individual survival above victory. Humans were different. Watched a medic named Sarah, barely 20 years old, run into enemy fire to reach a wounded soldier. A warrior shot her in the leg. She fell, crawled the rest of the way, grabbed the wounded man and dragged him back to safety while shooting at the enemy with her free hand. What is wrong with these creatures? A commander shouted over their communication channel. Why do they not flee? In the command center on the hill, Admiral Cole watched the battle unfold on holographic displays. Oz stood beside him, unable to look away from the horror and wonder below. They are dying, Oz said. His voice was barely a whisper. So many of them are dying. Yes, Cole said. His face was hard as stone. But they do not stop. No. A young soldier on the display threw himself at a warrior 3 times his size, giving his squad time to escape. The warrior killed him, but not before he had planted explosives on its armor. They died together in a ball of fire. He was 21 years old, Cole said quietly. His name was David Park. He had a sister back on Earth. He wanted to be a teacher after the war. Oz turned to look at the old admiral. Tears were running down Cole's face, but his voice never shook. How do you bear it? Oz asked, watching your young die. We don't bear it, Cole said. We carry it. Every commander carries the weight of everyone they've lost. It never gets lighter, we just get stronger. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. But we keep sending them because if we don't, everyone dies. The young, the old, everyone. Below, the battle was changing. They had expected to win quickly. They had expected the humans to break after the first hour, the first 1,000 dead. Instead, the humans were pushing back. They were adapting, learning, finding weaknesses in the enemy's tactics. Led her platoon around the flank of a formation. They had lost half their numbers, but the survivors were fighting harder than ever. Rage and grief had burned away their fear. They were not soldiers anymore. They were fire given human form. "For David," someone screamed. For everyone they killed." The formation broke. For the first time in their species' long history of conquest, they ran from an enemy. Supreme Commander watched the battle reports with growing disbelief. Her warriors were dying. Her veterans, her elite, her undefeated champions were being killed by children. "How is this possible?" she demanded. "They are young, they are weak, they are nothing." Her intelligence officer pulled up data on the human soldiers. Age ranges, physical capabilities, psychological profiles. The numbers did not make sense. "They should have broken," the officer said. "Every model we have says they should have retreated after 10% casualties. They have lost 23% and they are still advancing." "Then your models are wrong." "Commander, I do not understand it either, but look at this." The officer showed footage from a human soldier's camera recovered from a body on the battlefield. It showed humans laughing before the battle, joking, singing, and then fighting with absolute ferocity, crying out the names of fallen friends as they charged. "They are not fighting for survival," the officer said slowly. "They are fighting for each other. They would rather die than let their friends down." I stared at the footage. In her culture, warriors fought for glory and conquest and personal advancement. The idea of dying for someone else, especially dying for someone you had only known for a few months, was alien to her. These humans were alien, truly alien, more alien than any species she had ever faced. "Order the retreat," she said. Her officers stared at her in shock. "Commander." "Order the retreat. We need to learn more about these creatures before we fight them again." The warriors pulled back to their landing ships and fled into orbit. The humans did not chase them. They were too tired, too hurt, too busy caring for their wounded. Sat on the purple grass, her rifle across her knees. Her uniform was covered in blood, some of it hers, most of it belonging to others. She had lost 11 friends today, 11 young people who would never go home. But they had won. Somehow, against an enemy that had conquered 47 worlds, they had won. Admiral Cole's voice came over the communication system. "All units, this is command. The enemy is retreating. I repeat, the enemy is retreating." There was a pause. "You did it, soldiers. You held the line." Looked up at the sky, where the last of the ships were disappearing. She thought about David and all the others who had fallen. She thought about the enemy commander, somewhere up there, trying to understand what had just happened. They would be back, she knew that. This was just the beginning. But now they knew what they were facing. Now they knew that humanity's youth were not a weakness to be exploited. They were a fire that would not be put out. Supreme Commander could not sleep. She sat in her chambers aboard the flagship, reading Earth's history on a holographic display. The translation software had converted the human records into her language, but the words still did not make sense to her. World War I, 17 million dead. World War II, 70 million dead. The atomic age, weapons that could destroy entire cities in a single flash. The water wars, the Mars uprising, the unification conflicts. I had been a warrior for 600 years. She had conquered species that had never known violence, species that surrendered at the first sign of danger. She had thought she understood war. She did not understand this. These humans had been killing each other since before they had written language. They had invented 1,000 different ways to destroy their own kind. They had built weapons capable of ending all life on their planet, and they had built them while they were still trapped on a single world. And through it all, they had sent their young to fight. I found records of something called the Normandy invasion. Thousands of young humans, some barely 18 years old, had thrown themselves at fortified beaches in small boats. They knew they would probably die. They did it anyway, and they won. She found records of child soldiers throughout human history, children given weapons, children taught to kill, children dying in wars they did not start and could not understand. It was horrifying, it was insane. It was terrifying. "Commander," her intelligence officer said, entering the chamber, "you asked for a psychological analysis of the human soldiers." "Show me." The officer brought up new data. "We have studied their communication patterns, their behavior before and during battle, their response to casualties. Our analysts have reached a conclusion." "Which is?" "They are not like any species we have faced before. Elder species fight to survive. They calculate risk and reward. When the cost becomes too high, they retreat or surrender." The officer paused. "Humans do not calculate the same way. They fight for abstract concepts: honor, duty, revenge, love. Love. They form strong emotional bonds with their fellow soldiers. When one of them dies, the others do not become afraid. They become angry. They fight harder." The officer looked uncomfortable. "Commander, I believe we have been fighting this war incorrectly." "Explain." "Against elder species, heavy casualties break their will to fight. Against humans, heavy casualties increase their will to fight. Every soldier we kill creates more motivation in their comrades. We cannot defeat them through attrition. The more we hurt them, the more dangerous they become." I stared at the data for a long time. Then she laughed, a cold and bitter sound. "Then we must destroy them completely," she said. "Not their armies, their source." She began entering commands into her console. "Order all fleet elements to converge on the Sol system. We are going to burn Earth." Far away the humans were burying their dead. Corporal James was 19 years old. He had joined the military because he did not know what else to do with his life. Now he stood beside a row of graves, watching his friends disappear into the alien soil. Oz found him there as the sun was setting. "May I sit with you?" the ancient alien asked. James nodded. He did not have the energy to speak. Oz lowered himself carefully onto the purple grass. For a long time, they sat in silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. "I have been trying to understand your species," Oz finally said. "I have studied your history. I have watched your soldiers fight and die, but I still do not understand one thing." "What?" James asked. "Why do your elders send you to die? You are young. You have so much life ahead of you. In my culture, it is the elders who sacrifice themselves. We have already lived. We have nothing left to lose, but you." He shook his head. "You have everything to lose, and yet you come here and die for strangers." James was quiet for a moment. He thought about his great-great-grandfather, a man he had only known through old photographs and family stories. "My ancestor fought in a war called World War II, he said. "He was 18 years old when he stormed a beach in France. Thousands of people died that day, most of them his age or younger. He survived somehow, lived to be 93. "Did he regret it, going to war so young?" "No." James picked up a handful of purple grass and let it fall through his fingers. "He said it was the most important thing he ever did. Not because of glory or honor or any of that stuff, but because he was fighting for something bigger than himself. He was fighting so that his children and his and all the generations that came after could live in peace." "But you are at war now," Oz pointed out. "His sacrifice did not prevent this." "No," James admitted, "but it gave us 100 years of peace. 100 years where kids could grow up without fear. That's worth something, isn't it?" He looked at the graves of his friends. "Maybe our sacrifice will give the next generation another 100 years, or maybe just 10, or maybe just 1, but even 1 year of peace is worth dying for." Oz did not respond. He was thinking about his own species, about how they had grown so old and so careful. They had stopped sacrificing for the future. They had stopped fighting for anything at all. And now they were dying, not with courage, but with confusion and fear. "Does it not haunt your elders?" he asked. "The ones who send you to war, Do they not suffer watching you die?" James smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Every single day. I've seen Admiral Cole cry when he thinks no one is watching. He knows every name of every soldier who dies under his command. He carries them with him." He paused. "But he keeps sending us, because he knows something you don't understand yet." "What is that?" "Youth isn't weakness," James said. "It's fire. We're still young enough to believe in things, to believe that we can make a difference, to believe that dying for something matters." He looked up at the stars, which were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Your elders stopped believing a long time ago. That's why they can't fight anymore. They're too wise. They know too much. They've seen too many things fail." Os considered this. 12,000 years of wisdom, and he had never heard truth spoken so clearly by someone so young. "We are fire," he repeated softly. "Yeah," James stood up, brushing dirt from his uniform. "And right now, the galaxy needs fire more than it needs wisdom." He walked back toward the camp, leaving Os alone with the graves and the stars. The ancient sat there for a long time, thinking about fire and youth and sacrifice. Behind him, the young humans were gathering around their campfires, singing songs and telling stories about the friends they had lost. They were so young, so foolish, so brave. And for the first time in 6,000 years, Os wished he could be young again, young enough to believe, young enough to burn. A communication drone arrived at midnight, carrying a message from Admiral Cole. The fleet was moving. All ships were converging on a single target. Earth. The enemy had decided to end the war by destroying humanity's home. And most of humanity's military was here, too far away to help. James heard the news with the other soldiers. He watched their faces change from shock to anger to determination. "We need to go home," someone said. "We won't get there in time," another replied. "Then we die trying." James thought about his family back on Earth. His mother, his sister, his cousins. He thought about all the people who would die if the reached his. He picked up his rifle and started walking toward the ships. Behind him, 50 million other soldiers did the same. The armada dropped out of hyperspace above Earth like a storm of iron and fire. Over 1,000 warships, each one bristling with weapons capable of burning cities to ash. Supreme Commander stood on the bridge of her flagship and smiled. "Begin the bombardment," she ordered. "Burn everything." But her weapons did not fire. Something was wrong. Her tactical officers were shouting, pointing at displays that showed impossible readings. Ships were appearing all around the fleet. Human ships, not the sleek military vessels they had faced but older ships. Freighters with weapons welded to their hulls. Mining vessels converted into crude warships. Passenger liners with armor plates bolted to their sides. "Where did these come from?" a demanded. Earth had been almost undefended when they arrived. Almost. But humans had been fighting wars since before they had names. Every nation on Earth had contingency plans. Every family had emergency protocols. And every human, from the oldest grandmother to the youngest child, knew one simple truth. When home was threatened, you fought. Retired veterans climbed out of comfortable beds and reported to duty stations that had been mothballed for decades. Teenagers lied about their ages to join hastily formed militias. Factories that had been making consumer goods switched to weapons production in hours, not days. The whole planet mobilized with a speed that everything the thought they knew about civilizations. Admiral Cole's fleet was still days away, racing back from at maximum speed. But Earth did not wait for them. "All ships, this is Defense Command," a voice announced over the communication network. "We may not survive this day, but we will make them pay for every inch of our sky. Earth forever." "Earth forever," 1,000 voices replied. The battle began. It was not a military engagement. It was a brawl. Human ships threw themselves at warships that them 10 to 1. They rammed enemy vessels and detonated their own engines. They blocked firing lanes with their own hulls. They did everything that training and doctrine said they should never do. And they were dying. God, they were dying. But they were also killing. I watched in disbelief as a human freighter, barely larger than a shuttle, crashed directly into one of her destroyers. The explosion took out both ships and damaged two more nearby. The freighter had been piloted by a 60-year-old grandmother named Maria Santos. She had been a cargo hauler for 30 years. She had never fired a weapon in her life. Her last words, recorded by the ship's black box, were, "This is for my." "They are insane," I said. "They are completely insane." Her intelligence officer shook his head. "No, Commander, they are human." The battle raged for hours. Earth's makeshift fleet was being destroyed ship by ship, but they were slowing the advance. They were buying time. And then, at the darkest moment, salvation arrived. Admiral Cole's fleet dropped out of hyperspace behind the Armada. 200 warships, 50 million soldiers, all of them furious and ready to fight. "This is Admiral Cole to all human forces," Cole announced. His voice was calm, but there was iron underneath it. "We're home, and we're not leaving until every single one of these invaders is dead or gone." The fleet was caught between two forces. Ahead of them, Earth's desperate defenders. Behind them, humanity's professional military. For the first time in her long career, I felt something she had never experienced before. Fear. "We can still win this," she told her officers. "We outnumber them, we outgun them, press the attack." But the numbers did not matter anymore. The warriors were beginning to hesitate, to second-guess, to fear. They had never faced an enemy like this. They had never faced a species that treated death as an acceptable cost. Admiral Cole gave one final order. "All ships focus fire on the enemy flagship. Take it down." His own ship, the rebuilt Beijing, led the charge. It was an old vessel, one of the first warships humanity had ever built for space combat. Cole had served on it as a young officer 50 years ago. He knew every deck, every corridor, every weakness. He also knew that it was going to die today. The Beijing rammed into the flagship's shields at full speed. The impact cracked the hull, broke the engines, killed hundreds of crew. But it also broke through the shields. "Boarding parties away," Cole said quietly. Across the damaged Beijing, soldiers poured into breach pods and launched themselves at the enemy flagship. James was among them. So were thousands of other young humans who had fought at and survived. They crashed through the flagship's hull and fought their way toward the bridge. I heard them coming. She heard the screams of her warriors, the explosions of grenades, the endless roar of human weapons. She drew her own blade and waited. The door to her bridge exploded inward. James was the first one through. He was covered in blood and burns. His left eye was swollen shut. He was 19 years old, and he looked like he had been fighting for 1,000 years. "Supreme Commander," he said, "your war is over." I raised her blade. "I will not surrender to children." "We're not children," James said. He raised his rifle. "We're humanity." The battle ended quickly after that. With their flagship captured and their commander in chains, the fleet broke apart. Some ships fled into hyperspace. Others surrendered. A few fought to the death, but without coordination, they were easily destroyed. Earth had survived. Oz arrived 3 days later with a delegation from the Galactic Accord. He walked through the ruins of the battle, past the wreckage of ships and the graves of the fallen, until he reached the memorial that humans were already building. It was a simple thing, a wall of names stretching for kilometers. Every human who had died defending Earth was listed there. Old and young, soldier and civilian, professional and volunteer. They were all equal in death. Admiral Cole stood before the wall, his arm in a sling, his face lined with exhaustion and grief. He had survived the battle barely. Many of his crew had not. "How many?" Oz asked quietly. 4 million, Cole said. 4 million humans died today, and that's just the ones we've counted so far. Oz was silent for a long moment. 4 million lives. For his species, that would be an extinction event. For humans, it was a tragedy they would mourn for generations. But they had won. Your people, Oz said slowly, are the most remarkable beings I have ever encountered. In 12,000 years of life, I have never seen anything like what happened here today. Cole shook his head. We're not remarkable, we're just young, still young enough to fight for things that matter. A group of soldiers walked past, carrying a wounded comrade on a stretcher. They were laughing about something, even covered in blood and ash. They were young, most of them, barely more than children. Oz watched them go, then he turned back to Cole. The Accord will build a memorial, he said, on where your soldiers first proved themselves. It will honor your species for 10,000 years. Make it longer, Cole said. We plan on being around for a while. 1 year later, the memorial was complete. It stood on a hill overlooking the purple plains of a statue of a human soldier, young and fierce, standing guard over representations of the 12 elder species of the Accord. The soldier's face was determined, ready, unafraid. Oz gave the dedication speech. For he said, we believed that youth was a weakness, a phase to be survived before wisdom could begin. We protected our young and sent our elders to face danger. We thought this was civilized. We thought this was right. He paused, looking out at the crowd. Humans and aliens stood together, united in a way they had never been before. We were wrong, Oz continued. Humanity has taught us that youth is not the absence of wisdom. It is wisdom's fire before time banks the coals. They are young, yes, but they have been fighting since before they could walk. They have learned lessons that our ancient species forgot long ago. He turned to face the statue. They came when we called, they fought when we could not, they died so that we might live. His voice grew stronger. They were young, and that was their greatest strength. In the crowd, James stood with and the other survivors of the war. They were older now, marked by scars and memories that would never fade, but they were still young, still burning. Behind them, new recruits were arriving. More young humans, ready to take their place among the stars, ready to protect, to fight, to sacrifice. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. The myths of Earth's warrior youth were not myths at all. They were prophecy. And humanity was just getting started.